Saints Among Sinners, Part 1 and 2, The Amulet's Price, an Oblivion Remastered short story. Chapter 1, The Night of Weakness. Rain battered the stone walls of coral as the city's bells tolled midnight. Sir Garrick, once a knight of the Order of the Impervious Dragon, pressed himself into the shadows outside the chapel of Stendarr, his heart hammered with shame and desperation. In his gloved hand, he clutched a letter from the apothecary. His wife Lysa would not last another month without the rare elixir, and the coin he had was pitiful. Honor, Garrick thought bitterly, did not buy medicine. Lysa's illness had crept in like a winter fog, first sapping her strength, then stealing her beauty. Her skin had grown pale and thin, stretched taut over trembling bones. At night, Garrick would sit by her bedside and watch her chest rise and fall in shallow, rattling breaths. Her hair, once dark as raven's wings, now fell in brittle clumps onto her pillow. Ulcers bloomed on her arms and legs, raw and weeping, and her once bright eyes had dulled, clouded by pain and fever. Some days she could not speak at all, her throat ulcerated and voice reduced to a hoarse whisper. The apothecary called it a wasting sickness, one that withered flesh, numbed the limbs, and left its victims shivering even beneath heavy blankets. Each morning, Garrick feared she would not wake. He waited until the last priest left, then slipped inside. The chapel was quiet, the stained glass casting ghostly colors over the altar. He moved quickly, guided by memory and guilt, to the reliquary. The Amulet of the Dawn, a relic said to bless the worthy, gleamed atop velvet. Garrick's hands trembled as he lifted it, feeling a chill race up his arm.
"Forgive me,"
he whispered, but the gods were silent. The moment the amulet left its pedestal, the world lurched. The chapel dissolved into swirling mist, the floor dropping away beneath him. Garrick gasped, clutching the amulet as he fell through endless gray. He tumbled through a void that was not empty, but filled with flickering images and impossible landscapes. For a heartbeat, he plunged through a sunlit plain, where the air thundered with the footsteps of monstrous beasts, creatures unlike any he had seen, with scales like armor and eyes the size of shields. One, towering above the trees, craned a long, serpentine neck to bellow at the sky, while smaller, feathered things darted between its legs. Garrick's mind reeled. He could not name these beasts, nor fathom what world he had entered. Next, he spun through a realm of steaming jungles, where the ground shook beneath the charge of horned giants. Their skin was rough and pebbled, their mouths bristling with teeth like daggers. Garrick glimpsed a flock of winged reptiles, vast, leathery things that soared overhead, their shadows swallowing the light. He reached out, desperate for something solid, but his hand passed through the air as if he were no more than a ghost. The visions blurred, now a desert of red stone, where a monstrous three-clawed beast chased a herd of smaller creatures across the dunes, now a swamp where eyes glowed above the water's surface and unseen things slithered below. Through it all, Garrick felt himself slipping further from the world he knew, tumbling through realms where the laws of nature bent and broke. Finally, with a jolt, he landed hard on mossy Nirn. The sky above was a bruised violet, unfamiliar constellations spinning overhead. The air was thick with magic. He could taste it, like copper on his tongue. The amulet was still in his armored hand. Garrick, still clutching it, realized he was very far from home. He was in a forest, but not one he knew. The trees were ancient, their trunks twisted with runes that glowed faintly. In the distance, mountains rose like the backs of sleeping dragons.
"No, no, no!"
screamed Garrick. He needed the amulet to cure his beloved, and he didn't have the time to be sent somewhere distant. Garrick's first instinct was to retrace his steps, but the path behind him vanished into mist. He wandered for hours, calling for help, but only birds and chirping insects answered. Hunger gnawed at him. The twilight air shimmered with a strange stillness as Garrick wandered through the ageless land, clutching his own relic close to his chest. He paused at the edge of a clearing, senses alert, when he noticed movement among the pale silver grass. Garrick blinked, struggling to adjust to the endless twilight that stretched in every direction. The land was neither night nor day, and the air felt thick with magic. The feeling like he was in a dusk that repeated, only the weight of the relic in his hand and the sense that this place was not Tamriel. Garrick had once worn the green and tan cloak of the Impervious Dragon, an elite ranger squad sworn to the Empire. For years he'd tracked smugglers through the wilds of Cyrodiil and hunted monsters in the haunted vales of High Rock. The order demanded discipline, cunning, and a hunter's patience, skills Garrick had honed until they were second nature. He still moved quietly, viewed the land, and trusted the warning prickle at the base of his neck. What shook him to his core was hearing a ragged breathing, like snoring mixed with wet and hard gurgles in the distance. He hid behind a tree and saw something he has only heard about in stories, and himself only seen once. He saw an undead man walking with a limp. It was clear from the sword sticking through its body and the way it walked like it was dragging its legs that he was very, very dead. Or rather undead. It was walking in a straight line away from him. When the gurgled breathing was outside of earshot, Garrick realized he had been holding his breath. Gasping for air, he thought to himself, the undead looked very fresh. It must have been a very recent kill. Undead usually means necromancy. Not something he enjoys, since necromancy was frowned upon in the Empire. In his training, he was instructed how to kill an undead. You must separate the brain from the spine, and the entity dies. He always thought this training was unnecessary, until today. Thank you, Master Even King, for teaching him this art, even when he didn't show appreciation, thought Garrick. Hearing a crouch of a twin, he swiveled his head to see if the undead was coming back. His training always kicking in under duress. Now, in this endless twilight, those instincts screamed at him. Something else pressed in from the gloom. Something unseen, watching, waiting. Garrick's hand hovered near the relic in his hand, and he scanned the shifting shadows with a hunter's practiced eye. He didn't know how he'd come to this strange place, but every sense told him he was not alone, and that whatever stalked him here was far more dangerous than any beast he'd faced in Tamriel. He crouched low, breathing shallow, letting the silence settle around him. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere in the haze, he thought he glimpsed movement, a flicker of shape, too smooth and deliberate to be one of the aimless undead that sometimes wandered the wastes. Garrick's heart hammered, but he kept his body still, waiting for the figure to reveal itself. The old ranger's mantra echoed in his mind. Patience, vigilance, never let fear rule your hand. From the stranger's perspective, the encounter was just as fraught. Aldrin Varys had learned to recognize the signs of the undead, the jerky, unnatural gait, the hollow eyes, the stench of grave dust. As he stepped into Garrick's line of sight, Aldrin kept his hands raised high, palms open, making every movement slow and deliberate. He watched Garrick's eyes, sharp, wary, alive, and felt a surge of relief. This one was no mindless corpse. Still, Aldrin knew better than to trust too quickly. He kept his distance, voice steady but loud enough to carry.
Easy, friend,
he called out, watching for any sign of aggression or rot.
I mean you no harm.
Only when he saw Garrick's tension ease ever so slightly did Aldrin allow himself to hope that, for once, he'd found another living soul in this forsaken place. Garrick was definitely on edge since his arrival to this strange and dusk-filled land. As the figure emerged from the dusky haze, moving slowly and deliberately, his hands were raised high, palms open and facing outward, a universal gesture of peace, meant to calm and de-escalate the tension of their first meeting.
Easy, friend,
the stranger called out again, his voice calm and clear, repeating,
I mean you no harm.
Garrick was no stranger to hunting, and also being in the elite ranger squad, he would know when he was being watched. Garrick hesitated, but the man's open hands and gentle demeanor eased his tension, if only a little. The stranger stopped a respectful distance away and offered a small, genuine smile.
My name is Aldrin Varys. Are you from here, or have you ever heard of the Arcane University?
He said. Garrick responded,
I know of the Arcane University. I am not from here.
The stranger continued,
Oh, I guess that is good and bad. I am not from around here. I was a scholar at the Arcane University once. Now, I suppose I'm just another lost soul in this place. I am with a small group of people who found ourselves suddenly thrust into this strange land.
Aldrin glanced at the relic in Garrick's hand and nodded knowingly.
I see. You've brought something with you, too. Seems we all have.
Garrick relaxed his grip and nodded.
I'm Garrick. I don't really know how I got here.
Aldrin's expression softened with understanding.
You're not alone. None of us do at first. But maybe if we work together, we can find a way out.
He extended a hand, palm up, in a gesture of trust.
What do you say? Will you walk with me for a while?
Garrick looked at Aldrin's hand, then back at his searching eyes. After a moment's hesitation, he nodded and stepped forward, the first spark of camaraderie flickering between them in the endless twilight. Aldrin gestured to two individuals who made their presence known. As Aldrin spoke, Garrick's grip tightened on his relic. He noticed the others too, each of them clutching or wearing an object that seemed to pulse faintly in the gloom. It couldn't be a coincidence. Whatever force had brought them here, it had something to do with these stolen treasures. The first companion he met was a Dunmer, sharp-eyed and quick-fingered, who introduced herself with a wry smile. She began to ask if Garrick was from here, but Aldrin started shaking his head. No. She frowned and continued.
My name is Serendreth.
She said, her voice carrying the lilting accent of Morrowind.
I suppose you want to know what I'm doing here.
Garrick nodded, studying the glint of something strange at her belt. Saren followed his gaze and shrugged.
I stole this.
She said, holding up a jagged obsidian amulet.
A Daedric artifact. I thought it would make me rich or powerful or both. Instead, I vanished from Mournhold in a flash of green fire and woke up here.
She laughed, but there was no mirth in it. They walked a small pace toward a tree where a fire was slowly waiting. A tall, broad-shouldered Redguard sat beside it, roasting something over the flames. He looked up as they approached, his eyes wary but not unfriendly.
You're not the first to find me here,
he said.
Name's Rashad Al-Khoury. Once, I was a merchant in the deserts of Hammerfell. I took something I should not have, and bam! Suddenly I was thrown like a child to this awful place.
He held up a battered, jeweled dagger.
Stole it from a tomb. I thought it would buy me a house. Instead, it bought me eternity.
As they sat together by the fire, sharing stories, Garrick heard a distant, hollow clatter, bone on stone, the scrape of metal. Saren's eyes darted to the shadows, her hand moving to her amulet.
Keep your voices low,
she whispered.
They're always listening, always hunting.
Aldrin nodded grimly.
The dead walk here. I've seen them. Skeletal archers lurking in the ruins, armored heroes risen from their graves, and shielded skeletons that march in formation. They attack without warning, and they never tire. We nearly avoided a large party today.
Rashad's voice was low and steady.
Last night, they came for us. Arrows from the darkness, then a wave of shielded bones. We fought them off and ran to this new location.
Garrick's hand shook as he looked at his relic.
Why are they after you? What do they want?
Aldrin's gaze was haunted.
I think they're drawn to the relics, or maybe to our guilt. This place, it punishes thieves and trespassers. The dead are its enforcers.
Saren snorted, though her bravado seemed forced.
They're not so tough if you keep your wits, but they never stop coming. And the archers?
She touched a fresh scar on her arm.
They aim for the living.
The fire crackled, sending shadows dancing across their faces. The relics, Saren's amulet, Rashad's dagger, Aldrin's ancient scroll, seemed to pulse with a faint, mocking light.
We're all thieves, in a way,
Aldrin said quietly.
We took what wasn't ours, and now we're paying the price.
Rashad smiled, his eyes distant.
Perhaps we were meant to meet here. Perhaps our relics are the key to escaping this place. Or perhaps we're just the next to fall.
Aldrin looked at his companions, at Saren's defiant grin, at Rashad's quiet strength, at Garrick's uncertainty, and felt a flicker of hope, even in the face of death.
Then let's find out,
he said.
Together we are stronger than alone.
A sudden, distant shriek echoed through the twilight, followed by the twang of a bowstring and the unmistakable rattle of armored bones. The four stood, backs to the fire, relics in hand, and faced the gathering darkness. In this cursed land, hunted by the dead and haunted by their own choices, they would stand or fall together. And for the first time, Garrick felt that maybe, just maybe, they could find their way home. He didn't have much time, or he would lose the most important one he knew, his love, his beloved, his wife, his Lysa.
Hold on, Lysa, hold on. Fight as your life depends on it,
he thought to himself. Chapter 2. The Long Dusk. A week had passed since Garrick first met Aldrin, Saren, and Rashad. Garrick grew ever more frustrated with the thought of his wife not getting her medicine or her thinking he had abandoned her. The four survivors had settled into a tenuous routine, scouting for food and shelter by day, fortifying their camp and keeping watch by night. It was during this week in the strange realm when Garrick first noticed something wrong. He had been tracking a wounded deer through the forest, grateful for the chance to hunt something that wasn't already dead, when he spotted a group of adventurers in the distance. They moved with purpose, their armor gleaming impossibly bright despite the dim light. As he crept closer, he realized their voices carried strangely in the still air.
Man, this new Dawn Undead DLC is amazing,
said a burly warrior with a two-handed axe slung over his shoulder.
The loot drops are insane. Did you see that epic helm from the last lynch mob?
A slender elf with a bow grinned, her eyes flickering with excitement.
Yeah, and the high-level mobs are actually a challenge. I almost got wiped by that bone lord in the crypt. Had to chug like 3 potions just to stay up.
The third, a robed figure with a staff, was fiddling with a glowing ring.
I swear, if we don't get another legendary drop soon, I'm going to re-roll. But I love how the mobs just keep coming. Makes farming so much faster. And the new mechanics are wild.
The warrior laughed, swinging his axe experimentally.
Just reload the save. If we mess this up, I'm not losing my progress again.
Hold up, I need to level up before the next dungeon,
the elf said, scrolling through a floating menu that shimmered into existence in her hand. The bow she held flickered, transforming from wood to gleaming silver as she selected a different option.
I need to level up before the next dungeon,
replied the third person, examining a sword that suddenly changed appearance in her hand.
Let's fast travel to Marxian and get more potions of healing,
she finished. They stopped moving and suddenly vanished from his view. They faded from his eyes as in ghosts from bedtime stories. Garrick blinked and stared forward, clearly shaken. They vanished not through a portal or spell, but as if they had never been there at all. Only their footprints in the mud suggested They weren't phantoms. Garrick returned to camp unsettled, the encounter gnawing at the edges of his mind. He said nothing to the others. There was enough madness in this place already. That night, as the fire burned low, 3 new survivors stumbled into their camp. The first was a wiry Nord named Brina, her shield battered, but her eyes sharp. With her came a grizzled Imperial named Jorik, a former city guardsman who had lost his helm, but not his courage. The third was a tall, sturdy mage, but wearing gray armor, his staff crackling with arcane blue energy. He introduced himself as Thaddeus, and his voice was calm, almost scholarly, even as he eyed the darkness beyond their circle of light. Each of them found their way to this land by way of a stolen artifact or treasure.
We were separated from our group of Nords. Most were killed by a large horde of the undead,
Thaddeus explained, his gaze flickering to the relics each of them carried.
The dead are restless.
He had barely finished speaking when the first arrow hissed out of the gloom loud and announcing incoming danger. The arrow loudly soared through the air, striking Yorik's shield with a hollow clang as he quickly swiveled to block the attack. Garrick rolled to his feet, drawing his sword as skeletal archers emerged from the trees, their bows creaking and skulls grinning. Behind them came shielded skeletons in rusted armor, advancing in grim formation, and towering above them all was a skeletal hero, its ancient blade burning with cold blue fire. The attack came swift and brutal, as if the forest itself vomited forth the dead. Garrick's senses snapped into focus as arrows hissed from the trees and skeletal warriors crashed into their camp, shields raised and swords gleaming. But it was the dead hero that drew every eye. A towering figure in ancient corroded armor, its blade wreathed in crackling blue lightning. The sword hummed with unnatural power, arcs of electricity dancing from its edge to the ground, scorching the earth with every step. Leading the charge was a long, undead warrior with a pale sword. Even though it was long dead, it looked like he was directing the others. It pointed his pale sword at the group, and skeleton warriors rushed at them. Garrick moved with the cold precision of a seasoned hunter. He ducked beneath a wild swing from a skeleton, his own blade flashing as he hamstrung the creature, then drove his sword through its spine. He snatched up its battered shield, deflecting an arrow meant for Thaddeus, and pressed forward, targeting the shielded skeletons that formed the vanguard. They fought in eerie silence, their shields battered but unyielding, their movements mechanical and relentless. He knew their weakness. With a grunt, Garrick feigned left, drawing one skeleton shield high, then rolled right, slamming his borrowed shield into its legs. The undead toppled, and Garrick's sword found the gap beneath its chin, severing the spine. It broke apart, and its bone scatters on the ground. Another lunged at him, but he parried, knocking its shield aside and hacking down with savage force. Bones shattered, and the skeleton collapsed, its gold-studded sword clattering to the earth. Garrick scooped it up, tossing it to Rashad, who fought desperately at his side.
Thanks, Garrick. I owe you one,
said Rashad, Asby caught the sword right in time to defend himself. Rashad slammed the sword into skeletons, shattering them to the ground. The undead warrior with the pale sword looked irritated, much like a plan that didn't work would make a normal person frown. He looked toward the undead hero, and it began to advance. The dead hero surged forward, its electrified blade cleaving through the air. Jorik tried to block the blow, but the sword struck his shield with a thunderous crack, sending him sprawling, his arm numb and smoking from the jolt. Garrick met the hero's burning gaze, feeling the hairs on his arms stand on end as the air filled with the scent of ozone. To the right of them, the leader, an undead warrior, looked at Brina fighting with a group of 5 skeletons. She was bashing them to piles of bones and screaming with enjoyment. When 1 or 2 skeletons advanced, she would quickly slice them out of existence.
Today is my day to live or die by the old oak tree.
she sang out loud as more undead came at her.
The old oak tree is where my life should be, sweet and simple, hanging on the swing,
she continued. Brina fought like a cornered wolf, destroying the advancing hordes. Slowly, a group walked intently up to her and began to circle around her. In a quick few seconds, she found herself encompassed by at least 10 more skeletons with crusted swords and battered shields. She was not afraid and continued to sing,
the oak tree and me sitting on the swing, life should be this easy and free.
And with another swipe, she cut down another advancing skeleton. She eyed them each, and as one advanced, she broke them into bones and ash. They stopped advancing at her and allowed the undead warrior to walk in front of them. Brina slammed her shield into the undead warrior's face, expecting an easy defeat, shattering a piece of its jaw, but it grabbed her arm and slowly pushed its blade into her chest, plunging it beneath her breast. Brina screamed and gasped, eyes wide with shock as the blade slid slowly into her chest. She desperately pushed against the blade in its arm, but it did not impede its slow movement. The horror was not over. The skeleton lifted her effortlessly, impaled on its sword, until her feet dangled above the ground.
You have bested me, you undead trash,
she mutters, leaking blood down the sword to its hilt. Then, with a grotesque creak, the skeleton's jaw unhinged, and it bit into her exposed throat as it lifted her toward its mouth. Blood sprayed in a crimson arc, splattering the ground and the faces of her friends. Brina convulsed, her scream cut short as the skeleton fed, its bony fingers digging into her shoulder. With a final shuddering gasp, she went limp. The skeleton let her slide from its blade, her body hitting the earth with a wet thud. Although Garrick didn't know Brina, the sight of her brutal death at the hands of the undead sent a jolt of white-hot fury through him. He thought of his wife, and how angry he would be if that was her. Before he could act further, the mage who introduced himself as Thaddeus began to scream loudly and circle his arms in a clockwise motion. He began to release countless fireballs that enveloped the skeletons around Brina's limp body. Fire and explosions set fire to the surrounding landscape. The undead warrior looked at the mage in time for one fireball to strike its face, causing it to stagger.
"Do you like fireballs for breakfast?"
said Thaddeus. He screamed some language, and suddenly the undead being began to float into the air. The mage flexed his arms, and it appeared he was pulling something apart. The undead warrior was stretching, and its limbs snapped under some unseen stress. The mage shouted a few more words, and suddenly the undead warrior broke apart at the seams and was pulled into various pieces. Its separated parts fell to the ground and stopped moving. Thaddeus looked at the broken creature.
"You don't deserve the mercy I have shown you today."
Garrick let out a guttural roar and hurled himself into the fray, his sword cleaving through the shielded skeletons with merciless efficiency. The clang of steel on bone echoed through the clearing as he battered aside shields and hacked through brittle limbs. Gold coins and battered weapons spilled from the shattered undead, but Garrick barely registered the spoils. His world narrowed to the rhythm of battle: parry, strike, advance, driven by a desperate need to protect the living and avenge the fallen. The undead hero, looming above the melee, turned its burning gaze towards Saren and Garrick. With a flick of its crackling sword, it sent arcs of blue lightning dancing across the ground, forcing the pair to leap aside. The hero struck with calculated precision, its movements eerily fluid and purposeful. Unlike the mindless dead, it fought with the cunning of a seasoned warrior, anticipating their attacks and countering with brutal efficiency. Saren and Garrick fell into a rhythm born of necessity and trust. When the hero lunged at Garrick, Saren darted in, her dagger flashing to deflect the blow. When it turned on Saren, Garrick raised his shield, intercepting the electrified blade with a jolt that numbed his arm. They circled the hero, trading attacks and covering each other's flanks, but the creature adapted with every exchange. It blocked Saren's dagger with the flat of its sword, then spun, catching Garrick's blade on its armored forearm. Sparks flew as steel met steel, and the hero's weapon crackled with malevolent energy. Suddenly, Yorick, face set with grim determination, charged into the fray.
For the living!
He shouted, swinging his axe at the undead hero's exposed side. The blow rang off the hero's armor, drawing its attention. The hero turned, eyes burning with unnatural light, and in a display of chilling intelligence, allowed Garrick's sword to strike its gauntleted hand, trapping the blade for a split second. With a savage twist, it wrenched the sword from Garrick's grasp and, in the same motion, drove its own blade into Yorick's side.
Ah!
Screamed Yorick. The wound sizzled as electricity coursed through Yorick's body, and he howled in agony, collapsing to his knees. The hero's hollow eyes locked with Garrick's, and in that moment, a cold, primal fear crept into Garrick's heart. This was no ordinary undead. It was a predator, and it was enjoying the hunt. Before Garrick could recover, the hero's fist crashed into his face, sending him sprawling to the ground. Stars exploded behind his eyes, and the taste of blood filled his mouth as he struggled to rise. The hero advanced, sword raised, lightning crackling in the air, but was momentarily distracted by Thaddeus. At the center of the chaos, Thaddeus unleashed a torrent of lightning from his staff, arcs of energy leaping from skeleton to skeleton and reducing them to smoldering heaps. He dropped to Yorick's side, hands glowing with restorative magic.
Hold fast!
Thaddeus commanded, voice ringing with authority. He pressed his hands to Yorick's wound, golden light pouring from his palms as he chanted. The flesh knit together before their eyes, the bleeding slowed, and the wound closed. Yorick gasped, color returning to his cheeks as the pain receded.
Bless you, mage,
said Yorick, as he began to get up again. The undead hero pressed its attack, blade whistling through the air. Garrick, dazed but determined, rolled aside just in time to avoid a decapitating blow. He scrambled to his feet, snatched up a fallen sword, and lunged at the hero's knee, driving the blade deep into the joint. The hero staggered, electricity surging through its armor, but it did not fall. It spun, sweeping its sword in a deadly arc, forcing Garrick and Saren back. Suddenly, a guttural moan rose behind them. Brina, her throat torn, eyes clouded and lifeless, was rising from the blood-soaked earth. Her movements were jerky, unnatural, her mouth twisted in a rictus grin. Blood still gushed from her neck, staining her armor as she lurched toward Saren, fingers curled into claws.
Brina, no!
Yorick cried, voice raw with grief and horror. Garrick spun, heart twisting at the sight of their fallen comrade, now turned foe. With grim resolve, he stepped between Brina and Saren, raising his sword.
Forgive me,
he whispered, then drove his blade through her heart and out her spine. Brina's body shuddered, then collapsed, finally still. The undead hero, seeing its minions fall, let out a hollow, echoing roar. It lunged at Garrick, sword blazing with electricity. Garrick met the charge head-on, parrying the blade with his shield and driving his sword up into the hero's exposed ribs. The hero staggered, but did not yield. With a final desperate surge, Garrick pulled a lance from a defeated skeleton and, falling to his knee, pierced the hero through its midsection. He was close enough to whisper to the undead hero,
"Today you fall, you wretched creature."
And he yanked the electrified sword from the hero's grasp and, with all of his final stamina, struck it through the creature's skull. Lightning arced wildly, illuminating the battlefield in a blinding flash. The hero convulsed, then crumpled to the ground, finally defeated. Silence fell, broken only by the ragged breathing of the survivors. They stood among the bodies, blood and ash mingling at their feet. Thaddeus steadied Yorick, his healing spell still glowing faintly on his hands. Garrick stared at the dead hero's sword, feeling its power hum in his grip and the weight of what they had endured settle on his shoulders. The blade had a name, Volt Edge. He thought to himself how much he liked that name as he opened his inventory and claimed the sword. The battle's aftermath hung heavy in the air as the group gathered around Brina's body. No one spoke at first. Garrick, jaw clenched, knelt beside her, his hands rough but careful as he closed her eyes. Saren and Rashad exchanged wary glances, uncertain if they should help or keep their distance. Jorik, still pale and shaky, stood a few paces away, his hand pressed to his side, where Thaddeus's magic had closed the wound. They worked in silence, digging a shallow grave with whatever tools they could find. When it was done, Jorik laid Brina to rest, her sword placed across her chest. For a moment, the group stood awkwardly, as if waiting for someone to speak. Jorik cleared his throat, voice raw.
May your battles be glorious in Sovngarde, Brina.
He whispered, his words barely carrying through the hush.
You fought with honor. May you find peace where we could not give it.
Rashad tossed a handful of dirt onto the grave, his face unreadable. Saren quietly added a wildflower she'd found, her jaw set.
Nobody deserves to end up like that,
she said, her words hanging in the air. No one disagreed. The group turned to the grim task of searching the battlefield, each keeping a watchful eye on the others as they picked through the remains. Garrick moved methodically, checking the fallen for anything useful. He found a few silver and gold coins in each undead, a battered silver ring, and a few vials of health potion. He held one up, examining the seal, then gave it to Thaddeus to inspect if it was a healing potion. Saren pocketed a jeweled amulet, her gaze flicking to the others as if daring them to protest. Rashad gathered arrows and a sturdy-looking shield, while Jorik, still unsteady, took only what he needed. Saren crouched beside the armored corpse of the undead hero, rummaging through its scorched and battered belt pouch. She held up a handful of coins, counting quickly.
78 gold here,
she announced, tone guarded.
Looks like this one was carrying most of their pay.
Rashad was the first to laugh.
Pay. Ha ha ha. Good one.
Ah, Rashad, you like my jokes,
said Serene coyly. Garrick glanced at the pile, then at the others.
If we have gold and silver coins, does this mean we have a village nearby?
He asked. Everyone looked at each other inquisitively, the question hanging in the air.
Could be,
Rashad said, voice low.
Or maybe they took it from travelers like us?
Garrick nodded, then addressed the group.
I'll hold on to the money until we reach a settlement. No sense splitting it out here, where it could get lost or stolen.
He waited, watching for any sign of protest, but no one objected. Saren handed over the pouch, her eyes lingering on it a moment longer before letting go. Thaddeus, meanwhile, knelt by a fallen undead, collecting reagents and a cracked spellbook. Garrick, wiping blood from his hands, found himself nearby. The two men exchanged a glance, cautious but not unfriendly.
You did well back there,
Thaddeus said, his tone even.
Not many would stand their ground against something like that.
Garrick gave a brief nod.
You too. That healing spell. Jorik would be dead without it.
He hesitated, then added,
And your lightning. Never seen magic like that up close.
Many thanks again,
said Jorik, eavesdropping, while he was lifting some light armor from a downed skeleton. Thaddeus nodded in acceptance. Thaddeus's lips twitched in a faint smile.
It's not always so dramatic. You handled that sword like you'd done it 1,000 times.
Garrick shrugged, the tension in his shoulders easing a fraction.
Close enough.
He paused, glancing at the others, then back at Thaddeus.
We all pulled our weight. Guess that's something.
Thaddeus nodded, a spark of understanding passing between them.
We'll need to keep it up. This place doesn't seem to get any safer.
Garrick grunted in agreement, but for the first time, there was a hint of mutual respect in his eyes. He offered Thaddeus a small, guarded smile.
Let's hope we're both still standing once we find a new camp. Agreed,
Thaddeus replied. And the two men turned back to the group, the beginnings of camaraderie forged in the aftermath of battle. As the survivors gathered their loot and prepared to move on, There was still distance and suspicion in their eyes, but also, perhaps, the first fragile threads of trust. They were able to collect various valuables and loot. Garrick showed them how to create a sled big enough to hold the extra valuables in case they found a village and could barter. Before they set out, Thaddeus glanced around at the battered, bloodied faces of his companions. He reached into his satchel, pulling out a small crystal.
"Hold a moment,"
he said, his voice calm, but commanding enough to halt even Garrick in his tracks. He raised his staff, murmuring an incantation under his breath. The crystal glowed, sending a gentle wave of golden light washing over the group. The warmth seeped into aching muscles and throbbing wounds, knitting torn flesh and soothing bruises. Garrick felt the ache in his ribs fade, replaced by a surprising lightness. Saren flexed her hand, marveling at the way the cuts across her knuckles vanished. Even Jorik, who had been moving as if every breath hurt, straightened with a relieved sigh.
Not bad.
Rashad muttered, rolling his shoulder and finding it free of pain. Yorick managed a shaky grin, color returning to his face.
Feels like I could take on another dozen of those skeletons.
Jorik pulled the pale sword and sheath from the warrior in memory of Brina. He slung it to his side. The sword also had a name, Peacebringer. Saren shot Thaddeus a wary but appreciative look.
If you can do that every night, you might just be worth keeping around.
Thaddeus gave a tired smile, the faintest hint of pride in his eyes.
"I'll do what I can. Just don't get any ideas about jumping into another mess like that for fun."
Garrick nodded, feeling the tension in his body ease.
"We'll try to keep the heroics to a minimum,"
he said, and for the first time, there was a ripple of quiet laughter among them. With their wounds healed and spirits lifted, the group gathered their things and moved on, a little stronger and a little less wary than before. Stay tuned for Part 3. We hope you enjoy this short story and ask that you like and subscribe for more content like this.